MSNBC editor-at-large John Harwood and AXIOS political reporter Alexi McCammond. Good to have you all on board. Let's start with Joe Biden at the top of the hour, who is... So, Alexi, you're looking at how voters in Iowa look at this situation with Joe Biden and his son. What are they saying?
Yeah, and before we get to that, I just want to add something. I was joining Joe Biden during his No Malarkey tour in Iowa for the last few days of the trip, and one thing was clear over and over again, whether it was former Secretary of State John Kerry or a local precinct leader for the Iowa caucuses, the people around former Vice President Joe Biden are much better at telling his narrative and his story than he is capable of doing. But this issue with Hunter is simply not something that he can allow the folks around him to clean up, to your point, to Joe's point, to John's point. This is something he needs to find a better answer on. But he gets visibly angry about that. We saw that with the man he called a damn liar. We saw that when he invited us reporters on his bus for a 15-minute on-the-record conversation, which started with a conversation about Hunter Biden and us asking him about that. And he shut it down after a few rounds of back and forth because he simply doesn't want to talk about it anymore. But what I learned from Iowa voters is that while it's not coming up on the trail a lot, these questions about Hunter or other things, they like the way that they think Joe Biden is more of a moderate, pragmatic person who touts his ability to work with Republicans. And that was the striking thing that I heard many times from voters at these Biden events in Iowa. They're not hissing at the idea of a Democrat working across the aisle with a Republican in 2019, which is what you would expect from the louder voices in the party that, you know, many people assume are representative of the party being extremely liberal. That's just not the case with a lot of these crucial voters who are showing up to these events in Iowa who like people like Joe Biden, who like people like Amy Klobuchar, who like people like Mayor Pete Buttigieg, because they are not chasing these pie-in-the-sky ideas, as these voters put it to me.
And again, I think there's a lineage from those sort of candidates in Iowa back to Barack Obama. People who were hopeful, people who say, hey, you know what? We're in a bad place, but things can get better. Hope and change, 2020 style. But, you know, Mike Barnacle, though, and I'd be curious to see what Rev thinks about this, too. We're talking about this now and talking about the impact it's going to have, I think, in a general election if Joe Biden doesn't get it behind him. And Korea and their tyrannical leader. This is the antithesis of strength. This is a weak, cowering man that we saw at Helsinki.
You know,
if I could add, that's something that Joe Biden really hit over the head time and time again in Iowa. I was surprised when I showed up at how much these winding, long-winded stump speeches focused on foreign policy, but focused on what Joe Biden was arguing is a national embarrassment because of President Trump. He's saying that President Trump is weakening our standing in the world and that, you know, if he were elected president, he wouldn't be an international embarrassment in the way that he says President Trump is. He talked about Kim Jong-un and the love letters that you all just mentioned that President Trump loves to talk about them sending back and forth. They talk about Vladimir Putin. They're dropping these names of these dictators around the world that President Trump has cozied up to as a way for Joe Biden to show his strength on an international stage and the way that he would be a clear contrast to someone like Donald Trump if elected president. And I thought that was an interesting electability argument. Obviously, we had NATO last week and that ad that the Biden campaign cut that they found great success in, which was showing these other world leaders laughing at our president. But it was an interesting electability pitch for Joe Biden to focus on foreign policy and what Trump is doing to the U.S. globally.
And to John Harwood's point, no evidence that Joe Biden did anything wrong, abundant evidence that this president shook down a foreign leader for dirt on a political rival. And that's just half of it. Whatever's in that secret server, we might know more. And not to mention his kids. Hunter Biden did something legal, maybe not smart. Well, Donald Trump has Ivanka in there running for president, using the office, her father's office of the presidency to promote herself all day. Jared Kushner's in there. God knows what he's doing. And let's not forget Don Jr., you know, selling books. And
let's hear him.
Yeah, you know what? Good point. Alexi McCammond, thank you very much for your reporting. John Harwood will be watching your interview with Joe Biden as part of your Speakeasy series. And still ahead on Morning Joe, a member of one of the committees presenting evidence in this morning's high-stakes impeachment hearing. Congressman Jim Himes is